Good morning, Wheaton College, and welcome to chapel. As you eagerly scanned the chapel schedule immediately after removing it from SEPO earlier this semester, you undoubtedly said to yourself, exactly what does called to the city mean? And why does it necessitate a chapel? Well, I'm kind of in the same boat with you. I'm not 100% sure what called to the city means. I can't tell you exactly what it means, but just like all of you, I'm a liberal arts student with a bachelor's degree in fill in the blank. And I act like I got it all figured out, but I don't. But I can tell you why called to the city matters. It is an invitation to learn about what God has done and is doing in the city, and what the city has to teach us about ourselves, about each other, and more importantly, about Him. With that firmly established, I have the distinct privilege of introducing the participants of today's fireside discussion. Dr. Noah Toly is Associate Professor of Urban Studies in Politics and International Relations and is Director of the Urban Studies and Wheaton and Chicago programs and will be moderating today's discussion. Arloa Sutter is a graduate of Moody Bible Institute and Western Illinois University and received an MA in Urban Mission from Lincoln Christian University and a Doctorate of Ministry degree from the Bach Graduate University. Arloa is the founder and visionary leader of Breakthrough Urban Ministries on Chicago's West Side, which works to restore the broken networks of youth and families and empowers adults in the community to achieve self-sufficiency and to break the cycles of poverty. A compelling public speaker on poverty and social justice, Dr. Sutter has been interviewed frequently on radio and TV, is on staff at the River Community Church, and serves on the boards of the Chicago Low Income Housing Trust Fund and the Christian Community Development Association. She is also the author of the book, The Invisible, How the Church Can Find and Serve the Least of These, and she also happens to be a professor for our Wheaton and Chicago program. Franklin Ballinger grew up in the Austin community on Chicago West Side. Franklin began preaching at his grandfather's local church even before he was saved, and eventually was led to Christ in high school by a mentor of his, who took him under his wing. Upon this mentor's encouragement, Franklin attended Moody Bible Institute, and after graduation, Franklin founded and pastored the Good Shepherd Church until 2006, when he went to work for By the Hand Club for Kids as a volunteer coordinator, where he could pursue his passion of displaying Christ's love to children in a very real way. Last year, Franklin left By the Hand to pursue this passion in a different way. Now working with Chicago First Church of the Nazarene in branches of Missio Dei, Franklin hopes to plant non-conventional churches across the city of Chicago, starting in the Austin community where he was born, by establishing relationships with the local community youth, by engaging in conversation with and creating space for small groups, which will hopefully blossom into a kind of house church movement. He also worked greatly with us this past year on the orientation committee and putting that week together. So please join me in welcoming today's speakers.
Thank you, Dylan. And thanks to the Urban Studies Student Club for organizing this chapel. Thanks to the chapel band for their work today. Two things should be said to open chapel today. First, while the chapel program read, Noah Toly called to the city, I am but a small part of today's program. From the beginning, we have planned for me to interview two Christian leaders who live out a calling to the city and to learn from them about Christian vocation in our urban world. Second, and more importantly, as you've no doubt noticed, one of these two is unable to join us today. Yesterday, Franklin Ballinger sent the following message. I quote, "I'm sorry, but I cannot make it out to Wheaton this week for chapel. We have had 7 young men that have got shot in the last 10 days, and 3 have died. There's a gang war going on, and we have funerals, hospital visits this week. Pray for the families and staff." Here is an article of one of the young men I have known since he was 11 years old. The headline of the article that Franklin sent reads, "Fourth sibling to die of gun violence was trying to make a better life." The last of Shirley Chambers' 4 children was shot in the head and killed in the 1100 block of South Mozart. "Ronnie was my only surviving son," Shirley Chambers told ABC7. His 15-year-old sister, LaToya Chambers, was killed in 2000 near Cabrini Green. That same year, Jerome Chambers, 23, was shot and killed feet from where his sister died. And in 1995, Carlos Chambers was killed by a fellow student at Jones Metropolitan High School, now known as Jones College Prep. "What did I do wrong?" Shirley Chambers told the TV station. "I was there for them." Ronnie Chambers, known as Scooby, was the manager of an aspiring rapper who goes by the name YK and had recently been on Ricky Lake's TV show talking about changing his life, according to his longtime friends Nicole and Laverne Smith. That's the end of the article. Ronnie Chambers was one of 7 killed and 6 wounded in Chicago this past weekend. So as Franklin and the By the Hand staff grieve and serve their community, we keep this empty chair as a memorial to the violence they mourn. In fact, there are a number of memorials to victims of violence, which include whole communities suffering through this tragedy throughout Chicago. More than one, including the memorial at First United Methodist Church of Chicago, otherwise known as Chicago Temple, uses empty chairs, often classroom chairs, to signify the toll of this violence on youth. So I'd ask that you let this empty chair symbolize not only Franklin's absence today, but the absence of so many in Chicago, whose families and communities feel a certain emptiness every day. Consider it a calling to lament a world which is not the way it's supposed to be. Before we begin our conversation with Arloa, let us pray as Franklin requested. O merciful Father, you have taught us in your holy word that you do not willingly afflict or grieve the children of men. Look with pity upon the sorrows of your servant Franklin, for whom our prayers are offered. Remember him, O Lord, in mercy. Nourish his soul with patience. Comfort him with a sense of your goodness. Lift up your countenance upon him and give him peace. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Arloa, one of the shootings this past weekend happened in your neighborhood, West Garfield Park, which has certainly not been spared the ravages of violence in Chicago. Do you have anything you want to say about the epidemic of violence facing the city, gripping distressed neighborhoods? How has Breakthrough responded, and what are Christians called to in light of such tragedy?
Yeah, I mean, this is the real deal. This is really happening in my neighborhood. I live in East Garfield Park. There have probably been 8 shootings in the last year that I have heard about just right around where I live. There was last night 2 guys were shot at Holman in Washington at the gas station where the cashier was shot in the head and killed last year. This is a war zone where I'm friends with the author of Freakonomics, Stephen Levitt, and he came in one day to do a little research with us, and he asked if we could get some of the gang members in the same room. And so we got some black souls in the room, about 10 of them, and asked them questions about why this violence was happening. And it was heartbreaking. One of the guys said, well, you have to understand some guys ain't got nobody out there. And, sometimes the streets show you more love, one of them said. Or when your mom's on crack and your dad ain't home, you can't really blame it on the kids. So these are the kinds of things, gang members are 6 times more likely to be killed in Chicago than if they were in the war in Iraq in the height of the conflict. So what's Breakthrough doing about it? We have a strategy I really believe in wholeheartedly. And it's to start with early childhood education, 3- and 4-year-olds. We have an expanding preschool, and we start with these little kids, and we follow them up through their grades, offering after-school tutoring, all kinds of clubs. Because what you find out is that if kids get to the 3rd or 4th grade and they haven't experienced some kind of success, they give up on ever being able to make it in a living wage job in our society. And so they take to the streets. And the streets are violent. There's a kind of haphazardness about life. Life is cheap, and they know they will die early. And so we can make a difference by really starting with the little kids and surrounding them with a network of love and support and caring adults, making sure that they get in the good schools. In our neighborhood, the 4 grammar schools are all in the bottom 100 of the 1,600 schools in the state. Our reading scores in our local high school are 5.5%, are at grade level when they're juniors. So there's just a lot of issues that create this kind of violence and chaos, and we can make a difference, and we're seeing that happen.
So why are Christians called to make a difference? And how did you first experience that calling?
Well, I kind of just happened upon it. It was a situation where our church had the issue of people coming to the church wanting help, and we just didn't know how to help them. And so I opened up a storefront room and got to know people. But when you really start to hear the stories of homeless people that are out on the streets, yes, we provide food, shelter, and clothes, and housing, and employment training, and case management, and psychiatric care, and medical care for homeless people. But when you start listening to their stories, inevitably, it takes you in community development circles. We call it going up the river, where you see people drowning, and you want to find out, how did they get thrown in this river? So you keep going upstream. And so that's how we came upon the, early childhood education. Because if they're growing up in environments where they don't have opportunity for success, and they don't have relationships with people that can open doors for them and help to build skills, they get lost along the way.
And how does Breakthrough relate what it does with early childhood education?
So why is this, I missed part of your question, why is this core to the Christian faith?
Yes.
And I believe it is the calling of every Christian. I don't believe this is going to be a double negative, but we can't do nothing. We cannot do nothing about people who are in distress. I really believe that with my whole heart. Because God's heart is a heart of compassion. He shows it. He showed it by the way he lived, by how he came into life on earth as Jesus as a baby, and how he died on the cross to really create a hope and a future for people. And so it's all through Scripture, and I could go on and on about that. Read my book, because that's what it really is about. Is God calls us to. We are called to reweave the fabric of the shalom of God that is tattered and frayed and broken in various places throughout the world. Frederick Buechner says, God's calling is where your deep gladness meets the world's greatest need. And I really think that's a good quote, because if you think about the things that make you frustrated and angry, and the things that make you happy and glad, and take your skills and abilities and learn what they are, and then get plugged in to these areas of great need throughout the world. And that's when I really think you feel the power of God flow through you, the Spirit at work, because God's heart is a heart of compassion, always reaching out to try to lift people up to new life and give them hope and a future.
And how did you first experience that calling? Tell us the story of your coming to Breakthrough and the West Side.
Well, I started Breakthrough, so, it just started out of that storefront room, and, one thing led to another. I always say, this is the honest truth, I'm probably the least qualified person in the whole, we have 50-some staff now, but what I've done is I've always hired people who are better at something than I am, so I'm probably the least qualified to lead the organization, but I've been able to find really, really great people and build a team of people so that when we start serving coffee to the homeless in a storefront room, eventually it leads to an overnight shelter, which leads to employment training programs and housing opportunities, and then, like I said, going up the river and actually finding that we wanted to work with youth and to really prevent homelessness by being present in the lives of children and making sure that they don't fall through the cracks. So that's how I found that calling. I grew up on a farm in Iowa. The likelihood of me living in East Garfield Park in the city is pretty remote. But I challenge you, it's such an adventure. Try to put yourself in situations and circumstances where you learn and you stretch and you grow. I wouldn't trade for anything all that I've learned from, I come in thinking I want to help homeless people, and I find out I was the one who needed to be taught and to come alongside people who are so inspirational, who are making the most of bad situations, and they're resilient. And I've heard people say, well, we got to reach out to the least, the last, and the lost. And you know what? Sometimes we need to reach out to those who are impoverished, because we need to find ourselves and we need to find God. So we might be the ones who are lost. So that's my challenge, is to really, let yourself experience what it's like to be in environments that make you uncomfortable and learn and grow through that.
Tell us more about that. You started by saying we're called to serve those who are in distress. You yourself are serving in a distressed community, and yet in that answer you transitioned from serving people in distress to being served and being transformed. Tell us more about how you've been transformed and how you've seen others transformed by service.
Right, and those of you who have experienced, being in maybe a mission situation, or you've been even at Wheaton in Chicago, we say we get wrecked, and that is really a term of looking at coming into an urban situation, an urban environment, thinking we're all that. And I'll tell you, our homeless guests can smell that domineering kind of attitude a mile away. And what we do is, what you learn is that we are all the same. What we need to learn is, like the Church of Laodicea, you said you are rich and you're poor and destitute and naked and needy. And so when we get in an environment where we get to meet people who are really amazing in how they are, and a lot of them are rough and tough, but you get inspired and humbled by the way people are living. And we always talk about coming alongside people impacted by poverty. I use the term the poor because Jesus used the poor. And I've come to learn that there are always the poor. Even the people who I think are poor are called to the poor, because there's always someone that they're sharing their things with that is more poor than they are. So the idea of never being domineering or top down, but always coming alongside, learning, growing, it's always reciprocal. We learn from one another. But those of you, I look out at you, you're so privileged. I don't know if you realize how privileged you are to have this education, to have the connections that you have here. And just know that there are a lot of people who don't have the privileges that you have. And so what you have to bring to that relationship is the support, the opening of doors, the business entrepreneurship, the starting of programs and organizations that can help people and really help to provide the opportunities and the skills that people need. We need teachers, we need nurses and doctors, and we need daycare workers and preschool teachers, and just a whole lot of people. And I always say this because I was alerted to this verse in Deuteronomy 8:18, where it says, "Remember, it's God who gives you the ability to create wealth." So some of you aren't going to be called to live in East Garfield Park and have, I had a bullet go through my window. That's not everybody's calling. That's me. I love it. I want to be there. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, right? But some of you, God has given the ability to create wealth. And frankly, we have Wheaton students who've been through the Wheaton in Chicago program who are all over the city doing marvelous things ministry-wise. But probably the most often I meet with former Wheaton students, not my students because I haven't been doing it that long, but the most often I meet with former Wheaton students, they're donors. And I'll tell you, Wheaton College students have been very, very successful because you're very, very privileged, and you're funding, your people, our people, are funding a lot of great works across the world. And that's a huge, huge part of what needs to be done in order for us to, some of us to live the way we do and really be available. I learned earlier, we wouldn't want all of you to come into our neighborhood. You'd wreck it, But we can support people in the neighborhood who are doing wonderful things, and they're there. But lots of times just really stretched to know how they can survive with limited resources.
You've worked with Wheaton and Chicago students for a number of years now. What have you seen Wheaton students learn about God by serving in these ways? And how have you seen them embrace this calling to the city?
Yeah, I think when you become aware of situations and circumstances, I think it's easy to come into, if you're a transplant like I am from a farm, right? and you come into an urban environment, you scratch your head wondering why is there all this garbage around here? And, why are people shooting each other? And why are there bars in front of all the windows? And, you got to shove your credit card or your dollar underneath the glass in the gas station. Why is this? And you question. And so that curiosity leads you forward. But in the process of learning the root causes of some of the distress in our communities, what I see is hearts being broken, a deeper understanding of God's love for all people. You read 1 John, we don't have an option not to love people, not to take certain groups of people and say, I'm not going to love those people because they're such and such. We just don't have the option as Christians. If we love God, we love people. And so what happens is our students come in to Wheaton in Chicago, or interns come in from the outside, and their hearts get broken, and there's almost an addiction to it. It's like you so want to be there and you so want to figure it out. And I know I can't leave my neighborhood until everybody's got a job, and that's probably not going to happen. I'm probably going to have to die there. But I want everybody to have a job. It just drives me crazy that people don't have jobs. The factories left our neighborhoods, and there's just, what do you do? How do I get my neighbor who's uneducated and has a felony, how is he going to get an income? And so, our neighbors are wheeling and dealing and, sharing each other's electricity and, keeping the stoves on and, to get heat in the house, and just trying so hard to make do without any possibility of a job on the horizon. And I think we've got to be able to solve that. We've got to be able to think of ways to get people work where they actually have an income. And so, I'm just rambling. I don't even know what you asked me anymore.
No.
That's what happens. You get to be my age. It's like, just let me talk.
Well, you were certainly answering the question. The
Okay.
question was about what students learn about God and how they embrace His calling, and you're definitely answering that. And what I heard you saying was that they learn about God and they learn about what God intends for the world. They have their dispositions and attitudes shaped, but on the other hand, they also need to gain knowledge through this experience about how things work. Right? So that if they're going to go upstream, they know where that is.
Yes.
Is that what I hear you saying?
Right. I think we have a moral obligation to educate ourselves about race and oppression and poverty. I don't think, I would just challenge you to make that one of your goals is to read books like Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, or read John Perkins and Bob Lupton, Theirs is the Kingdom. Read some of these things and just really educate yourself, because, of course, we hear it in the news all the time. But how can you? I was talking to somebody yesterday who has a wonderful house in Palm Beach, and he says, I go across the bridge and there's all this poverty, and he's trying to figure out why is that? And so, I challenge you to educate yourselves especially about racism. It's very big challenge, I think, in the church, and we need to talk about it because it's affecting people. And what happens is these become people who are your family that you love, and it hurts when they hurt. And so that's the transition that happens when people get to feel the compassion of God for His beloved people who He's created, and they're in such distress. And so that motivates us to get involved with immigration and get involved with educational segregation and housing discrimination and make things right. I think as Christians, we're called to make things right. The word righteousness carries within it the meaning for the word justice, and so we're to seek Him first in His justice. Seek justice with all your might, with everything you can bring to it.
So you talked about students who have these experiences and how they're transformed, and yet not every student, for lots of different reasons, can spend a lot of time in the city. What's one practical takeaway that every student in here can take with them when they leave the chapel doors this morning?
Yeah, I think, Bob Lupton has a book out, Toxic Charity, and he really has a hard time with mission trips. And I get what he's saying. We spend a lot of money on mission trips where we go in and we try to help people. But I think vision trips are different. I think come in to developing countries, into urban neighborhoods that are distressed, and come alongside groups like Breakthrough and learn, I think is one thing. I think, take some time to educate yourself and read the books. You can learn a lot from books, but there's nothing like actually having relationships. And I challenge you to always make sure that your group is not all white. There's a lot of white faces in here, and we really need to be proactive and take initiative to make sure that we are developing diversity in our lives and in our church experiences, because it changes the way, the way we talk in a room when there's more diversity. So I would challenge you to, whatever businesses you go into, or institutions or organizations, work at cross-cultural understanding and communication. You really need that in this, especially in this day and age. You've got to be able to talk to all people and not offend and be offensive and be ignorant in things that you say. And I see the posts on Facebook, and I'm appalled sometimes that Christians can say what they say. And so it's embarrassing. So.
Thanks, Arloa. I really appreciate your time here today. Students, we'd ask that you consider these things. I have one announcement to make from the Urban Studies Student Club. They invite the campus community to an interactive event about living in the questions of the urban experience on Friday, February 8th at 3:30 p.m. So be on the lookout for posters around campus if that interests you. And please join me in giving a hand to Arloa Sutter, our guest.